Welcome back to episode 4 of the Doctor Who Classic Series Action Figures A History. In today's episode we continue where we left off, looking at the releases of 2010, featuring the second full wave of general release action figures, the introduction of the 7th Doctor into the line for the first ever time within 2 collector sets, and most excitingly the release of the first ever classic Tardis exterior boxes. January 2010 came around the corner, the start of a brand new decade, and seen the release of the second wave of Doctor Who Classic Series action figures. The original plans for Wave 2 I do believe were in fact strikingly different compared to that of what we got to see within the final product of the line. As you can see, very unusually compared to that of Wave 1, this wave is entirely consistent of just Doctor Who monsters and villains, as opposed to any incarnations of the Doctor. I do believe that the original plans for this wave were rumoured to include the 7th and 8th incarnations of the Doctor, however this was later dropped. There was also plans, I do believe, to include a collect and build within this wave that was of course from the 4th Doctor story, the Seeds of Doom, being the Crinoid monster. However, this was later released as a part of the Forbidden Planet exclusive line, and the sculpt was also used for the Axon monster from the 3rd Doctor story, the Claws of Axos. From what I can remember, this wave of action figures is almost the last ever time that the classic series actually went into general sale in other retailers around the UK, including just your regular toy shops from Toys R Us to Argos and many other toy stockists. From this point onwards, the classic series line did tend to become more focused around exclusives to Forbidden Planet, Toys R Us, and of course in more recent years, B&M. So starting off Wave 2 with one of my personal favourite figures of the set, it is of course from the 5th Doctor era, and it is the Earthshock Cyberman, one of which that I was quite surprised that we didn't get to see within the Age of Steel wave of Cyberman action figures from the classic series that tended to focus solely on the 60s era of the show's history. Now I absolutely love this design, and I think that back in the day when these figures were released, this one was heavily fought after by fans, no doubt because quite a few people were buying it in bulk in order to build an army, as well as to paint the handlebars black, of course to replicate that of the Cyber Leader. As with the majority of the Cybermen figures, this one does consist of a lot of really nice details. I especially love the fact that they've included the remains of the humanoid jaw underneath the clay section, which has been really nicely painted. And then of course moving down the figure itself, we also have the inclusion of the chest unit, as well as the boiler suit section, which this time round compared to the 60s Cybermen has been given a lot more detail. As you can see, we have these different mesh sections, as well as even a series of different pieces of wiring around the suit as a whole, and this even stretches up to the back of the figure as well. Of course, as with this being an 80s Cyberman, it is now a regular occurrence for them to include handheld guns, which this time round it has been painted rather nicely. We have the plastic strap coming around the side, including a few paint taps at the top there to almost be reminiscent of the pepper pot design as seen on the Cyberman guns. Of course, due to this being an Earthshock Cyberman, at the very bottom we do have the inclusion of the rather bulky moon-style boots which are used on the 5th Doctor era Cybermen, which is once again a sculpt that is only seen on this figure release, as well as the Rogue Cyberman that was released alongside the 6th Doctor as a part of the Forbidden Planet exclusive series. This is a rather nice and accurate looking sculpt, even including the grey soul at the very bottom. The next figure of the wave is in fact a rather unusual occurrence, because we have a monster from the 60s era of the show. However, it is not a Cyberman or Dalek. It is of course the Ice Warrior from the 2nd Doctor story, conveniently titled The Ice Warriors, which did of course then go on to have other cameos throughout the show's history, including a recent return within the new series, however under a much different design. I think that this is another example, much like the Sea Devils and the Ice Warrior action figures, where fans of the show who haven't even watched the classic series will probably like to add this figure to their shelves simply because it looks like a cool Doctor Who monster, certainly appealing to the new series younger fans who no doubt hadn't even delved into the classic series as of yet. In particular, I really loved as a kid how this figure has used a red plastic around the eye sections to replicate the visor on the helmet. I thought that was really cool. and the rest of the body is in fact a rather similar design throughout the entirety really. It's been sculpted in a green plastic, and then over the top we've seen this black wash that has been used to really nicely bring out these scale details. As you can see, we have some small scales around the side, and then we have this dotted line section that is used pretty much through the entirety of the limbs as well, stretching down to the leg sections. And then of course, to separate this out, we do also have the sculpt inclusions of a few bits of fur in there as well, which is a really cool touch. Due to this being an ice warrior, of course they don't have regular human hands, but they do in fact have these U-shaped claws, which once again continue around to the back as well, where we have a few almost square designs in there, and the continuation of that ridged section around to the back as well. I think that one of the main benefits of having waves of action figures as opposed to the Forbidden Planet exclusive collector sets is that character options could just create some cool looking monsters, especially from the 60s and 70s, and something of which that they didn't need to build an entire set around and say release 4 figures from simply just one story. And unfortunately, after this wave, we did of course no longer see a brand new wave of single carded classic series action figures, which no doubt if they did continue, we would have seen more 60s villains such as this one replicated within the figure format. However, sadly of course, that never happened. Wave 2 also seen the release of the first ever classic series incarnation of the Master in action figure form, and it is in fact a rather unusual one to start off with. It is the Master as seen throughout the Deadly Assassin, known as the Decayed Master, or the Crispy Master, or the Corpse Master, whatever you want to call it. Now this sculpt was released again a little bit later on in the line as a part of the Forbidden Planet exclusive series, as of course the Beaver's Master as seen throughout the Keep of Traken. I do believe that this one is in fact the incarnation as portrayed by Peter Pratt. The main difference between this figure and the Peter Pratt incarnation is that there is a completely different head sculpt, and this one features the rather awful and menacing decayed head of course the outline of a skull, with those really lovely bulging eyes that have also been painted a bright blue colour, and then of course you have the remains of the teeth in there as well, along with almost this burnt design around the majority of the face. I can remember this absolutely creeping me out as a kid, and for good reason, because it looks absolutely terrifying. The rest of the figure is in fact rather basic. As you can see, we just have the use of this robe all the way throughout, which has been given some rather nice textures of a few bits of ripped material here and there, which is also the same around the front as well, where we have the inclusion of the sash of Rassilon, something of which that he did wear in the later half of the story, however not for the episode's majority. I do believe that a few people take that off, however I don't think I could actually get mine off and actually put it back on again without damaging the figure. And of course at the very top we do have the inclusion of the hood, which uses the same detailing of deteriorating material design. As the first ever figure of the Master from the classic series, this figure was certainly a promising start, and once again a rather iconic image from the classic series. It would have been quite nice to maybe see this figure come with the rod of Rassilon so he could wield it in his hand from the very end of the episode. However, he just comes with his sash and his regular Staser gun. And thinking back to what I was saying earlier about the Ice Warrior just being simply a cool looking villain, well here we have the definition of a bog-eyed monster. We do of course have the Mbius Creature from the 4th Doctor story, The Brains of Morbius. Now what's another one that will appeal to those younger fans who simply just want a cool action figure to add to their Doctor Who collection, because it is a Frankenstein creation. We have this human hand at one side, the giant claw in the other, and then of course we even have a fishbowl with a brain inside. What is not to like? Thinking back to the days where I actually had no internet connection and very little understanding of classic series Doctor Who, I can remember actually thinking that Morbius was almost a slave or henchman of the Daleks, very much like how the Orgorons are, and that was simply down to the fact that we have these two eyes here, nicely replicated using plastic in a bronze colour, that kind of look like Dalek eye stalks. That was my only reasoning behind it, but I can still kind of see why I thought it back when I was a little kid. Of course, Morbius is in no relation to the Daleks whatsoever. We do of course have a really lovely sculpt of the brain in the jar, along with these dome sections on the side, which also look a little bit Dalekish with those bulbs, and then a little bit of wiring at the back as well. And of course, to complete that really almost Frankenstein-ish look on Monster of a Minotaur, we have a little bit of fur around the back there, along with many different cuts and scars within the actual skin itself, especially around here we have some lovely paint apps, and even around the front we have this unusual wired string section, including a little bit of fur around the side as well. on. Something that does also add quite a lot of play value is that the claw is actually movable as well, which you can attach your figure's throat around that and you can make it look like he's strangling him, which is a nice little play option. And of course, moving down to the lower half of the figure, we just have some very stumpy legs and of course those bottom feet as well, which does make the figure a little bit top heavy, I must admit. He is a figure that is rather difficult to stand, so he does spend the majority of his life at the back of the shelf, sadly. The fifth figure of the wave is one that will look incredibly familiar if you have been watching the previous episodes within this series. It is another Asylum War Robot, or simply just known as the Mummy, from the Pyramids of Mars, originally released in the 4th Doctor Monsters set, or 4th Doctor Adventures set. Now this is exactly the same to that original version, including some really lovely detailing of the bandages as well as paint taps over the top of this to really make the figure look dated and battered like it has been in a tomb. However, we do have another rather exciting inclusion. We have a brand new variation of Canopic Jar. Now of course the jar itself is exactly the same sculpt with the Egyptian hieroglyphics down the side, however this time round it has been given a dirty wash, bringing on the original Jackal Head version from the 4th Doctor Adventure set. There is a major difference between the two. I quite like the way that this one has been given that dirty look, it just makes it look a bit more interesting. However, the main difference is of course within the head. This time we have a bird, a hawk or something like that. It's been a while since I've needed to learn about Egyptian mythology and beliefs. I do believe that this might be one of their gods or something like that, that take some of the organs from the body, because of course they put that within these jars or something, and then these sit within the tomb. A rather nice sculpt. It's sort of a bronzish colour with a few bits of weathering detail on once again, and a few Egyptian symbols around the side, and a little bit of ridging around the back as well. And very much like the previous release, if you take off the lid, we do also have the little control unit on the inside, which is the same sculpt to the last one, including some Egyptian hieroglyphics on the golden band there at the very bottom. The sixth and final figure of the wave is one of which that if you've been watching this series from the very beginning, you have seen many times before and are no doubt a little bit sick of. It is another Vox Robot, however this time round quite a cool little variant, including red glowing eyes to symbolise, I think, when they turned to the evil side within the story itself. Now if I had to make a bet, I would imagine that both this figure and the Mummy figure originally weren't intended to be a part of the wave, and in a way they are effective replacements for what would have been the 7th and 8th incarnations of the Doctor. That's just me going out on a complete whim and guessing what may have happened. However, I think that either way, this is quite a nice variant to add to the shelf. Much like the Vox Robot released as a part of the 4th Doctor Adventure set, this Vox Robot is in the same mint green colour scheme. We do also have the use of the name badge once again that you can put a little sticker on across there to represent a certain number of Vox Robot. However, the main difference, if not the only difference, is in fact in the head section, where we do have a slight adjustment to the sculpt. Once again, the paint taps are exactly the same to the other Vox Robots released, so we have the mint green design with a few really lovely silver highlights around the eyes and the mouth and the lips especially, and then we have the adjustment in the sculpt to include the 2 red eyes that have been really nicely recreated by using a transparent piece of plastic. Now bringing in my phone, because thankfully this has a torch, as you can see shining this in the top does in fact give the impression of almost the lights, there we go, of the lights glowing, which is in fact once again a rather cool feature. It's quite a nice sort of photography option and looking very ominous indeed. And with the release of the Vox Robot from Wave 2, it now completes the entirety of the Vox Robot collection. So we've seen some rather nice variants along the way, including D84 and SV7. However, of course, there was a 5th variant of Vox Robot that was originally planned. I do believe, once again, a mint green version. However, this time round, it had a knife stuck in its head. I do believe, no doubt, from Leela. However, of course, that figure was never released, but it was originally planned to be. Vox Robots do look really nice next to each other, and of course very soon these robots will have their very own spin-off on Big Finish. And that concludes our look back on the second and final wave of Doctor Who Classic Series single-carded action figure releases. It would have been lovely to see more waves after this in the future of the line, as I think this format generally has a lot of potential. It would have been great to maybe see even a wave focused entirely around the 1960s of Doctor Who, featuring some of the lesser known yet cool looking villains, such as say the Monoids, the Celestial Toymaker, the Zarbi, the Quarks, the Crotons maybe even from the second Doctor era. However, unfortunately, after the release of this wave, I've never seen another wave released for general sale, but I think that it is fair to say that we ended off on a wave of rather nice variety from many different eras of the classic series. And now we return to the world of Forbidden Planet exclusive classic series releases with a set that I'm quite frankly going to be complimenting non-stop for the next few minutes. We have the 7th Doctor in cream jacket alongside an Imperial Dalek from the brilliant 7th Doctor story, Remembrance of the Daleks, one of my first ever experiences of classic series Doctor Who. And I think that is probably one of the main reasons why I absolutely adore this set. I can remember buying this once again from my local Forbidden Planet back in 2010, and this is one of those rare occasions where even at the age of 10 I would normally buy Doctor Who figures. However, I wouldn't necessarily play with them. However, with this set, I have fond memories of having the 7th Doctor running away from the Imperial Dalek like he's being fired at by the exterminator gun, and all of the other new series Daleks were in fact the renegades that of course the Imperials were up against within the actual story. I think that this is a perfect pairing because I absolutely love the 7th Doctor sculpt as it is, and the Imperial Dalek is also one of my favourite colour schemes ever seen on a Dalek throughout the show's entire history. So as Doctor Who Classic Series sets go, this is one of my personal favourites ever. 7th Doctor figure sculpt would of course see a number of different releases over the years, as all of the 7th Doctor figures do in fact have exactly the same body, just with a number of different repaints here and there. Now I am aware that the costume itself represented on this figure isn't necessarily as accurate as what it could be, however I certainly get the impression of what it is meant to look like, therefore I still love it for what it is, and I think it's still a good representation of the costume itself. Like most of the classic series Doctors, the 7th Doctor would in fact see two different head sculpts released, the first of which is this one being the smiling and hatted head, and the second one being the non-hatted and more stern facial expression. Now this head to me represents the more light-hearted version of the 7th Doctor seen throughout the early half of his era, and I think that it really nicely captures his character, even though it does look a little bit creepy. So we do have his rather interesting smile and the very thick eyebrows, and I think that this does look like McCoy, especially as you can see from the side here. I think that they've certainly got his side profile very well, and his hat is also a rather nice sculpt, including a red band at the very top, along with a little ribbon piece in there as well, which is a rather nice cream colour. Now this head would in fact remain a pretty much Forbidden Planet exclusive up until the current point of filming, as all of the more common releases are in fact the non-hatted stern head, such as the recent B&M re-releases. Moving down the costume, this is an absolutely stunning design and features a lovely amount of detail. So as you can see, he is wearing his cream jacket from his first two seasons. We have the inclusion of this gold chain at the side, which I do believe is meant to be silver. However, I don't really mind too much, but the inner critic in me just wanted to point that out. The actual scarf itself is also a rather nice and interesting intricate design, where it has been given a red base colour with this really lovely almost swirled blue pattern over the top, and the actual jumper itself is once again a little bit wrong. I do believe that this is meant to have an additional row of question marks, and they are a little bit unevenly spaced compared to that of the regular jumper, which is quite hard to represent within the figure format. We have a white shirt and a red tie, which was also differ on the future releases of this figure, and then of course at the very bottom we have his trousers, which have been nicely painted in a checkered black, white and orange stripe design. As with all of the Forbidden Planet exclusive 7th Doctor figures, he does also come packaged with his trademark umbrella. That is a really nice sculpt. The main colour itself is of course black, and the tip at the bottom, as well as the question mark itself, have been painted in a rather nice red. Taking a look at the Remembrance Imperial Dalek, a really lovely design, once again really nicely represented within action figure form. Of course the body of the Dalek itself is pretty much exactly the same to your regular Doctor Who Classic Series Daleks, however this time round this section in between the weaponry has been replaced by almost a hexagon design, which is rather unusual. And then we do also have around the back the brand new slats that are seen for the first ever time on this figure as well, this time with the absence of any mesh detailing. Is much more of just a simplified rectangular design, including these different golden bar sections and the white sections in between. The main difference of this figure compared to the other Imperial Dalek released is that the actual sucker arm itself is exactly the same sculpt to your other classic series Dalek manipulator arms. However, there has been some slight alterations to the detail, where in fact the plunger itself has been changed, where you have these two little grooves that have been added in. However, other than that, the sculpt is exactly the same. Of course, the ear bulbs on the Dalek has also seen a little bit of an upgrade. As you can see, we have this now new flat sculpt, which has been recreated out of a translucent plastic with a golden paint tap over the top, and naturally the same is for the opposite side. The other slight difference is that on the eye stalk, this is exactly the same sculpt to any other classic series Dalek, painted white with golden bands, and of course the golden end as well. However, on the later versions of this Dalek, this eye stalk would in fact be shrunk down a little bit and not be as long as every other classic series Dalek release. Once again, I do believe that this is in fact an accurate move compared to what is seen on the props within the actual story. And as for the fender of the Dalek, this time round they've used the sculpt of the two divided sections, including the slightly larger piece at the top and then the slightly thinner section at the very bottom. Both of these figures look absolutely brilliant next to each other and also really nicely complement each other due to the similarities between the colour palette of the cream designs. And if you have the opportunity to pick either of these figures up, especially if together and in the box, then I highly recommend it, because it is probably once again one of the highlights of the classic series line of action figures. The April of 2010 seen the release of a second variant of the First Doctor, this time round from the first Doctor Who story, An Unearthly Child, and does in fact see a number of different new sculpts, however the same regular trousers on the bottom that was seen on the original SDCC version of the First Doctor. The character options are often known for being a little bit strategic when it comes to the release of their new series action figures, most notably with the Series 4 wave. They released the entire wave of figures from that series, and then in matter of months later they released the exact same wave again, however with the collect and build parts for the Vesper form. And I think that for the most part the classic series line was quite fair when it came to the releases. However, this First Doctor figure is probably one of the closest that they became to being rather strategic, as this original version was released in 2010, and then only a few months later, in July, we had the release of virtually exactly the same figure again, with exactly the same accessory, however this time round with the First Doctor's Tardis. Obviously quite a lot of fans did buy the original version of the First Doctor, thinking that it would be the only release of that product, and didn't really expect it to come out again for a second time. However, here we are with two pretty much identical figures to add to the collection. This release does of course see a brand new sculpt of First Doctor face, which once again sports a stunning likeness to William Hartnell, with some really lovely details and sharp paint taps around the front of the face, including the eyes. The hair itself has also seen a slight upgrade, bringing in the original SDCC version. As you can see, we do have a little bit more of a wider stretch of hair coming around to the side of the wig as compared to this original version that seems to be a little bit more streamlined and tucked back. And then of course the most noticeable difference with this figure is of course the inclusion of the hat that have some rather nice textures of woolen material. As for the main body itself, the First Doctor jacket has now been fastened up, which is a rather nice touch, and the cravat just under the scarf has been painted a dark blue colour. As for the rest of the figure, of course we have this rather nice PV sculpt of the black cloak, and then of course the scarf printed over the top, and this does also follow onto the back of the figure as well. A rather nice spread material design with a few creases in there, as well as the scarf coming around the shoulder. This figure does also come with your regular walking cane as per usual, that features your regular twists, and the bottom half of the legs are just exactly the same to the original version, with the light grey and the darker checkered design. Both releases of the An Unearthly Child First Doctor do also come packaged alongside a small human skull to represent one of the stories within An Unearthly Child called the Cave of Skulls, which, to be honest, for the size, the detailing on this accessory is quite nice, including some weathered paint taps around the jaw section, really emphasising the teeth, and the darker paint taps on the eye sockets. For the first time this series, in 2010, seeing the first time that I missed out on a classic series action figure collector set, having not had enough pocket money at the time when I was younger. As a kid, I opted to buy the 7th Doctor and Tardis over the 4th Doctor and Tardis set, both of which are in fact lovely products. However, the one that I decided not to buy has since become one of the rarest within the line. Thanks to fellow Doctor Who figure reviewer and collector Matthew from Batmanmarch, who I'm sure you are all aware of. He has kindly covered the 4th Doctor and Tardis set so it can still feature within this series.
June 2010 was an exciting time for Doctor Who collectors, as it saw the release of not one but 2 electronic classic TARDISes, with another to follow a month later. First we had the ever-popular Tom Baker, packaged with characters' rendition of the altered Bukaki prop, as seen in Season 13. The set was packaged with a backdrop of Zeta Minor from The Planet of Evil, and featured a re-release of the 4th Doctor from Wave 1, complete with swappable head and sonic screwdriver. That was something of a pity, as this was the perfect opportunity for a repaint of the torso piece to resemble the houndstooth waistcoat and red cravat, something they would later incorrectly do on all of the duffel coat 4th Doctors. The TARDIS itself uses a generic sculpt that would form the basis of every classic series TARDIS toy to come. The box features some lovely texturing that harks back to the fact that these wooden props were covered in Artex to look like concrete. Other attempts were made to resemble the real prop, such as the black and white door sign and the flat roof, although it should be noted that none of the classic boxes ever had a flat roof, not even the Stumpy Newbury prop. The toy took its inspiration from the flight control TARDISes of the modern range, with a pressure-activated button on the base to activate the lamp and materialization-dematerialization sound effect, and the doors were spring-loaded with a button in the base. It was because of this that we get the slightly too heavy base on the toy, which would be tweaked in the future. Overall, it was a great start to what would later become an extensive range of TARDIS toys based on the original series.
And now that the classic series line of Doctor Who action figures are in full swing, rather excitingly we have the long-awaited TARDIS exterior box from the 1980s, packaged alongside another variant of the 7th Doctor, reusing the sculpt that was seen earlier on in 2010. Now this is a monumental moment within the classic series line, as many Doctor Who fans did naturally want a TARDIS to go alongside some of their classic incarnations of the Doctor, and 2010 would of course see not only 1, but 3 TARDIS exteriors released, 7th Doctor TARDIS, from apparently the Curse of Fenric. Much like all of the original TARDIS sets from the Forbidden Planet exclusive line, they are once again highly sought after by fans, especially the 4th Doctor TARDIS, which is the rarest of the 3. Taking a look at the 7th Doctor, of course this is the second variant released as a part of the classic line, and follows exactly the same sculpt to that of the cream Remembrance of the Daleks version. However, I think that this repaint is once again a rather effective one, and does look very much like the 7th Doctor costume, as seen throughout the later 2 seasons within his era, now sporting a brown jacket. Much like the Remembrance version of the 7th Doctor, this Curse of Fenric variation does of course include the same head sculpt with pretty much exactly the same paint apps, and of course the hat along with the grin, which I must admit, both of them together look incredibly creepy. Of course, the main body section is where all of the variation in paint apps have taken place, so the cream jacket has now been replaced by this rather nice chocolatey brown design. The scarf has also seen a little bit of an upgrade, with the red base colour now replaced by a more burgundy. However, there is also the blue flecks added over the top to create this rather nice swirl pattern, very similar to the original version. We also have the inclusion of the 7th Doctor trademark question mark jumper, which is once again painted rather nicely. However, I do believe once again features the inaccurate amount of rows of question marks. However, it is still nicely represented, even if the question marks do become smaller as you go down the jumper, which does look a little bit weird. The tie has now been replaced by a dark blue tie with a few silver and red swirls added over the top, and the white shirt still remains, along with the golden watch chain. On the bottom half of the jacket, we do also have the inclusion of the handkerchief, much like the original version of 7th Doctor. However, much like the scarf, this has now been replaced by a much more burgundy and brown design. Giving a close-up comparison to the 2 different costumes, I think that both of them are very nice in design, and both feature a stunning amount of detail. Moving down to the bottom, we do also have a variation within the trousers, much like the majority of 7th Doctor figures, as the light grey and black checkered design of the original Remembrance of the Dalek 7th Doctor has now been replaced by a much more brown colour palette with a light brown base colour, and once again a black checkered design added over the top. And as you would expect, the 7th Doctor has been packaged with his standard umbrella, exactly the same to the original release. And of course, now moving on to the main focus of the set, it is of course the 7th Doctor TARDIS exterior box, designed in the show by Tom Yardley-Jones. Now I think it would be fair to say that there might have been a mixed reaction to this TARDIS along with the other classic series TARDISes when they were originally released back in the day, because there is a lot of limitations due to the classic series TARDISes having many variations over the years. In an ideal world, it would be brilliant to have an individual sculpt for each different representation of TARDIS. However, it was soon established that the classic series TARDISes certainly wouldn't be following that, and they would be using exactly the same exterior box design, just with a few alterations here and there, most notably within the stacked roof or the flat roof, and of course the alterations within the signage, meaning that quite a lot of the boxes don't really look directly like what is seen on TV, but is a good enough impression, and to be honest, I don't mind too much. This TARDIS box does feature a rather bright blue design, in fact the brightest of all the classic series TARDISes really, and unusually it lacks almost entirely in weathering, which is something that can't be said for the more recently released B&M exclusive TARDISes. One of the most unique traits of this TARDIS is that the pull to open sign does indeed actually open, to reveal on the inside a phone, even with the dial painted. Due to the pull to open phone feature, of course the TARDIS doors do still open, however this one is in fact mildly hindered due to the phone box. The entirety of the police public call box has been painted in a bright blue colour, and I must admit I do quite like it. The signage on the top of the box has been printed once again rather clearly, with of course the lettering in a bright white and the background a darker blue. The most noticeable difference for this TARDIS exterior is the inclusion of a stacked roof and of course the lamp on the plinth at the very top. At the current time of this release, alongside the 4th Doctor TARDIS, this was this TARDIS's unique trait. However, we have later seen this sculpt reused on the 5th Doctor B&M TARDIS release in 2019, as well as the 1st Doctor TARDIS that would come in later 2010. Due to this TARDIS exterior being a part of the Forbidden Planet exclusive line, it does also have light and sound effects, including both taking off and landing sound effects, and also the lantern at the top of the roof does light up. This set was originally a recommended retail for £35, along with the other classic series TARDIS and Doctor sets, and if you get the opportunity to get this set for, I dare say, under £100, then I highly recommend doing so, because it's a brilliant product, great to add to the collection, and looking back, all 3 of the Forbidden Planet exclusive sets are highly collectible. Of course, in recent years we have seen re-releases with the B&M TARDISes that do not have sound effects and are in fact brand new, repainted variations. Mid-2010 was an incredibly busy time for the Doctor Who Classic Series action figure series that really started to experiment with the type of figures being released, having our first ever TARDIS Classic exterior boxes coming to existence, and the 7th Doctor making his debut within the line through 2 different variations of outfit. A massive thank you to Matthew Toffolo once more for helping out with this episode and filling the gaps that younger me missed out on, and do stay tuned for further instalments within this series in the many weeks to come. Thanks for watching, and I shall see you all next time. Bye for now.